Proportional Response. Book 1. Chapter 23, Part 7, Wild Monkey Wrenches. The Duke closed with an expression of gratitude to all present for treating this matter with the decorum it required, and finished with time remaining. As their platform floated back to its place, Hannibal considered his Duke's words. I so wish he could have started his bid for the lectern, but he did incredibly well with what he could do, particularly since I know he was basically winging it. They say, dress for the job you want, and he managed to walk the fine line of doing just that without appearing to do so. The Zoltan had insisted that the last word be in defense of Kilintar, as protocol demanded. He was given a far larger window to speak than anyone else had. Hannibal had to hand it to the man. He was quite the orator, and skilled at political strategy. The man knew that he couldn't blue-wash the reputation of Kilintar, so he started by downplaying the man's sins, dismissing the things which were most egregious as poorly substantiated, and provided documents to try and prove such a case, then moved on to the good that the man had done during his tenure and the many crises through which he had steered the council with a firm hand upon the helm. The lizard wrapped his comments with not even a second to spare, asking everyone if they really wanted to roll the dice on who might end up as Prime Minister, given the magnitude of the current crisis, or if they would be more comfortable with a hand that they knew could guide them through it. Hannibal had to struggle to keep his expression bland as he watched some of the more undecided or easily frightened, for Gefnan's speech did contain a few veiled threats, begin to weaken in their resolve. Euro provided him with a count, though, of who seemed to waver and how many still obviously stood strong, and his fears dimmed. Then Hannibal's fear spiked again. The time had come for the Penigran to speak. Henry introduced the Penigran in bland tones, stating that the man had leaned on his status as an ambassador to a founding race in order to be given the last word in defense of the Prime Minister. The Penigran set his platform to a painfully slow descent, struck a regal pose, and looked around the chamber in what Hannibal's translation software told him was an expression of polite disdain, whatever that meant. After descending to a position directly above and in front of the Prime Minister's lectern, and using that descent to build anticipation, the bird spoke in hard tones. I thank Ambassador Archer for paying proper respect to a founder of this glorious league, one which has sheltered and guided all of our governments and peoples for so many centuries. He is, however, not quite correct in my intended subject. The man gave a dramatic sigh. I had, in truth, hoped to congratulate this council in advance for its steadfastness to the principles of order and propriety in defending the Prime Minister who had guided us all for so long, through so many crises, as the esteemed ambassador. Gefnan pointed out. Alas, after hearing the harsh words bandied about against a man who can't even be present for fear of what the humans might do to him, and thus is unable to defend himself or answer the charges, Henry interrupted. Prime Minister was given a guarantee of safe passage by the Confederation, and all honors due his title. He was also given the option to attend this session remotely. The Penigran raised a hand and interrupted. Yes, he was given the option of appearing so weak that he had to attend from elsewhere, or entrust his defense to others. I am not really here to debate these things, however. I mention them only to have you all understand that I can see, easily, which way that this vote will go, and that so many of you had already, to your shame, I tell you, determined your vote before you even stepped into this august chamber. The schedule which was published for this session calls for a recess until midday tomorrow after the last speaker, to give everyone the opportunity to digest and consider what they have heard and been given, no doubt in an attempt to give this sham some appearance of legitimacy. Hannibal studiously kept the frown off his face. He wanted to express his disapproval, but the hairs on his neck were standing up. He wasn't sure what he expected from the Penigran, but he knew it wasn't wherever this was headed. The bird continued. That will not be necessary. The man paused for effect as angry and bewildered murmurs spread through the council chamber. I, as a member, the ambassador of a founding race, with full authorization from my government and the noble crown, am exercising a point of order token granted to my government by a majority vote of the council for services rendered to the League. Another set of murmurs, this time with an air of confusion spread through the chamber as the ambassador reached out and touched a control. Enable looked down as his screen lit up and his eyes widened. This dates back to less than a year after the founding. What is he even playing at? His anxiety began to build, and a sharp intake of breath from Yoro, who was swiping through unseen windows so fast she seemed to be swatting at insects, only deepened his concern. This point of order token is an old rule, it is true, one that fell out of favor centuries ago, and a rule was even put in place to prevent new ones from being issued. The rules regarding those which exist have not been rescinded or revoked, however. All of you can look up the rules in a few moments to your heart's content. You will find I am well within my rights, therefore, I am exercising the point of order token, which is now displayed on your consoles, to put an end to this farce. I declare the vote for which this session was called to be null and void. You lot may sit around and babble all you wish, but the computers will respect the point of order, and no vote will be recorded. Angry mutters spread through the council hall, and Enibble felt his own hands ball into fists. This can't be. Surely a rule so old can be fought. We will, the ambassador continued, interrupting his thoughts. There may be some among you who wish to challenge me on this. The rules I am using for this are, after all, quite old, and there was, of course, the vote some time ago to prevent these points from being awarded. You will further note that the rules regarding these tokens I hold are coded into this chamber's computer systems, and the code for them is deep within the most secured function. The only way for you to do anything substantive about my use of these tokens would be to go through the procedures to have the deepest levels of this chamber's code changed. The ambassador leaned forward slightly and tilted his head down just enough that shadows cast over his eyes. Enibble didn't need his translation software to mark this as a threat display. So know this. I do what I do on direct orders from His Royal Majesty, the Crown of the Lofra Kingdom. To change the code involved in these tokens would be to directly defy the Lofra Crown, and that is not something any of you wish to do. The muttering turned to grumbles, but Enibble could all but feel the fear behind the anger. The humans may consider the Penigra to be a toothless cow, but they have been the ephemeral boogeyman that everyone has feared for as long as there has been a league. With that, the ambassador floated his platform swiftly back to its place and used his own founder override controls to kill the lights in the council chamber. Enibble stood there, staring down at the Prime Minister's podium. This can't be. Surely he doesn't have very many of those, or there is something we could do. He turned to Yoro for reassurance, only to find her staring, wide-eyed, off into the distance, her hands still, and a nearly pinkish color about her features. That night, Enibble sat in his living room, with the private lines open to the Betha, Fimekan, Arabso, and, of course, Henry. He wished he could take solace in a stiff drink, but somehow that didn't seem like the greatest of ideas. Once everyone had assembled, Henry spoke with an undercurrent of fury in his voice. We can stop him from doing this again. It took some digging, but we found the session records where they stopped this point of order nonsense. While it is true that they weren't able to quash the points which had already been awarded, all of them to staunch Altan allies, coincidentally enough, we can garner the votes required to change the council rules regarding the use of those tokens, even to permit programmers to change the code. The vote. Inkthal the Betha cut Henry off. Might as well require a unanimous vote of all ambassadors and their mothers after that threat. I know you mighty humans and crafty Venter may not fear the Penigra, but nearly everyone else does to some degree or another. Or, I should say, to a sufficient degree that they won't be willing to go against them, yet with such a naked and vague threat hanging out there. Balud the Arabso took up the conversation. You humans haven't been around long enough to understand, Henry. I'm sorry to say, the Penigra are an enigma to most races, and the fear of the unknown mighty power is something they have carefully, even subtly, cultivated for centuries. Indeed, I don't think they have ever made this sort of direct threat in the council before, and that is going to have a lot of governments, and their citizens, shaking in their walking appendage coverings. Henry pursed his lips, but said nothing. Instead he turned to Yoro. She shook her head sadly, but a rage burned in her eyes. A year. Everyone gasped, and Enibble reached out to take her hand. It felt cold, and he felt his own eyes widen. She shook her head and spoke with a resignation in her voice that seemed at war with the rage in her eyes. "A year. If we make milling through the Penigra's tokens the sole activity of this council, calling for the vote of no confidence every time that anyone is able to call a session, this is, of course, impossible. There are lots of agenda items already set, after all, if nothing else. So, realistically, we are looking at closer to 2 years before we can make them burn through those damned points." Yoro's grip on Enable's hand became punishingly tight for a few moments. He gripped her back enough to keep it from hurting. "She is stronger than I thought. Stronger than anyone gives her credit for, really." That non sequitur of a thought hung in his mind as he clung to it like a life raft to keep from drowning in the reality of what he'd just heard. A long, steady stream of cursing, in at least a dozen languages Enable could recognize, and several more he couldn't, came from Henry. Then, Kaz picked up with more when the human ran out. When Kaz wound himself down the Bytha, contented himself with a single clicking syllable, that it took Enable's translator nearly half a minute to finish explaining. They all sat in melancholy silence for a while. Even when he thought about it years later, Enable couldn't figure out for how long. It was Kaz who finally broke the silence. "Final fallback plan it is then. I will inform Her Majesty that it is time for us to enter the war directly. Too much can happen in 2 years of war, even more so when the Penigra are out there playing wildcard, and no one knows just how far they are willing to throw their cards." Balud and Gael leaned towards their cameras and held out a hand, as if wishing to place them on Kaz's shoulders, but Henry shook his head. "No, I don't think we are there yet. I will need to consult some more with my government, military and intelligence people, but we have some ideas. Also, there are a number of plays that are still in progress, most especially our support of Major Mendesh, which would be heavily undermined if we started trying to run full-on conquest.